My sister mocked me at Dad's funeral, so I read the letter he left that changed everything. The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Cathedral in downtown Chicago, creating a symphony of sorrow that seemed to match the weight pressing down on my chest. October 15, 2023, a date that would forever be etched in my memory as the day everything I thought I knew about my family crumbled like autumn leaves beneath my feet. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 31 years old, standing in a black dress I'd bought at Target the night before because I couldn't afford anything better. The fabric was scratchy against my skin, a constant reminder of how different I was from everyone else in this ornate cathedral filled with Chicago's elite. My father, Robert Mitchell, had been one of the city's most successful real estate developers, and his funeral was attended by mayors, senators, and business moguls whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries. But none of that mattered to me as I stood in the back corner, trying to make myself invisible while watching my sister Victoria hold court near the front pew like the queen she'd always believed herself to be. Victoria Mitchell Blackstone, 35 years old, was everything I'd never been and everything our family had always wanted me to become. She stood 5'8" in her designer Louboutin heels, her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves that caught the cathedral's ambient lighting like a halo. Her black Chanel suit probably cost more than I made in 3 months working as a substitute teacher in the public school system. She moved through the crowd of mourners with the grace of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world, accepting condolences with practiced elegance while dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief that matched her purse. I, on the other hand, stood alone. At 5'4" with mousy brown hair that refused to hold any style for more than an hour, I'd always been the unremarkable Mitchell daughter. Where Victoria had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a business degree and immediately married Jonathan Blackstone, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, I'd barely scraped through community college with an associate's degree in education. Where Victoria lived in a 7-bedroom mansion in Lake Forest with her successful husband and 2 picture-perfect children, I rented a studio apartment above a pizza shop in Logan Square, where the radiator clanked all night and the neighbor's dog barked at every passing car. The differences between us had been apparent since childhood, but they'd never been more pronounced than at this moment, surrounded by the ghosts of our shared past and the reality of our divergent presents. Sarah? A soft voice beside me interrupted my melancholy thoughts. I turned to see Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor from when we were children. She was probably in her 80s now, her silver hair pinned back in a simple bun, wearing a modest black dress that had clearly seen many such occasions. Mrs. Henderson, I managed, forcing a smile despite the tears threatening to spill down my cheeks. Thank you for coming. Your father was a good man, she said, patting my arm with her weathered hand. He used to talk about you girls all the time when he'd come check on me after Harold passed. Always so proud. The words stung more than they comforted. If Dad had been proud of me, he'd certainly never shown it. Every conversation we'd had in the past decade had been punctuated with subtle disappointments and not so subtle suggestions that I should get my life together and follow Victoria's example. As if summoned by my thoughts, Victoria's voice cut through the murmur of condolences like a blade through silk. She was standing near the flower arrangements, elaborate displays that probably cost more than my monthly rent, speaking to a group of Dad's business associates. Of course, Sarah's here somewhere, she said, her tone carrying that particular blend of condescension and false concern that she'd perfected over the years. You know how she is. Never quite figured out how to be successful like Daddy always hoped. The men around her, all expensive suits and gold watches, nodded sympathetically, as if my alleged failures were a tragedy they could relate to. One of them, a man I recognized as Dad's business partner, shook his head sadly. Such a shame when children don't live up to their potential, he murmured. Robert was always so worried about her. My cheeks burned with humiliation, but I was trapped by the crowd between us. I couldn't leave without causing a scene, and I couldn't confront her without proving every point she'd just made about my lack of class and composure. Victoria continued, her voice carrying just loud enough for half the cathedral to hear. I keep telling her she should go back to school, get a real degree, maybe find a decent man. But you know how some people are, they just accept mediocrity. She sighed dramatically, as if my existence was a burden she bore with saintly patience. Daddy tried so hard with her, invested so much money in tutors and opportunities, but some people just can't be helped. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my arm tighter, her eyes flashing with anger I'd never seen from the gentle woman. That girl was always a nasty piece of work, she whispered. Even as a child, she had a cruel streak. But her words barely registered. I was drowning in a sea of memories, each one confirming what Victoria had just announced to half of Chicago's elite. I was the family disappointment, the daughter who'd never amounted to anything, the one who'd wasted every opportunity and broken our father's heart with my persistent mediocrity. The service began with Father O'Malley's resonant voice filling the cathedral, but I heard none of it. I was lost in a spiral of shame and grief that threatened to consume me entirely. Victoria sat in the front row with her perfect family, Jonathan on one side, their children Emma and Michael on the other, while I remained standing in the back like an unwelcome guest at my own father's funeral. During the eulogy, Victoria rose to speak about Dad's business legacy and his devotion to family. She looked radiant under the soft lights, every word measured and meaningful, painting a picture of a man who'd built an empire and raised successful children to carry on his vision. She never mentioned me directly, but the omission was deafening. In her version of our family story, I simply didn't exist. My father believed in excellence, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. He taught us that success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself, but about how you lift others up and build something lasting for future generations. Her eyes swept across the congregation, carefully avoiding the back corner where I stood. He would want to be remembered not just for his business accomplishments, but for the values he instilled in his family, values of hard work, integrity, and never settling for less than your best. The irony was suffocating. Here she stood, talking about lifting others up, while having just publicly humiliated me in front of everyone who'd ever mattered to our father. The values of integrity, while painting me as a disappointment to anyone within earshot. The notion of never settling for less than your best, while implying that my best had never been good enough. When the service ended, the congregation began filing toward the cemetery for the burial. I hung back, hoping to avoid any more public displays of my inadequacy, but Victoria had other plans. Sarah, she called out, her voice bright and false. There you are. I was looking everywhere for you. She approached with her entourage, Jonathan, the children, and several family friends who watched our interaction with the morbid curiosity of spectators at a car accident. I was just telling everyone how proud Daddy was of your teaching, she said, the pause before teaching heavy with implication. It's so important to have people willing to work with less fortunate children. The backhanded compliment hit its mark perfectly. In one sentence, she'd managed to minimize my career, imply that I was some sort of charity case, and suggest that even my modest professional achievements were somehow beneath our family standards. Actually, I said, finding my voice despite the tremor I couldn't quite suppress, I work with all kinds of children. Many of them are quite gifted. Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes sharpened with predatory focus. Of course they are. I'm sure you're very adequate at what you do. She turned to Jonathan, who was checking his expensive watch with obvious impatience. Darling, we should get to the cemetery. The burial is supposed to start in 15 minutes, and you know how these public school teachers are about schedules. The dismissal was complete and devastating. Public school teacher, said with the same tone someone might use to describe a communicable disease. The implication that my concerns about timing were somehow petty or inappropriate. The casual cruelty wrapped in concern for punctuality. As they walked away, I heard Victoria's voice floating back, She's always been so sensitive. Daddy used to say she took everything too personally. I stood frozen in the emptying cathedral, watching my family disappear through the massive oak doors without a backward glance. The weight of 31 years of being the lesser daughter crashed down on me all at once. Every birthday where Victoria's gifts were more expensive and thoughtful. Every family dinner where her achievements were celebrated while my accomplishments were met with polite nods. Every holiday photo where she stood in the center while I hovered at the edges. Mrs. Henderson appeared beside me again, her face etched with concern. "Don't let her poison your memories, dear," she said softly. "Your father loved you." I know he did. But her words felt hollow against the mountain of evidence to the contrary. If Dad had loved me, why had he spent my entire life comparing me to Victoria? Why had every conversation been about what I should be doing differently, what I should be achieving, who I should become? Why had he left his entire estate to Victoria while giving me only a small trust fund, enough to pay for community college and little else? The cemetery was a blur of expensive flowers and designer grief. I stood at the back of the crowd again, watching dirt fall onto my father's casket while Victoria accepted condolences with perfect composure. When it was over, when the last mourner had offered their respects and drifted away to their luxury cars, I found myself alone at the graveside. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered to the fresh earth. "I'm sorry I was never enough." The walk back to my beat-up Honda Civic was the longest of my life. Each step felt like a confirmation of every cruel word Victoria had spoken, every disappointment I'd ever seen in Dad's eyes. By the time I reached my car, the rain had soaked through my cheap dress, and I was shivering from both cold and emotional exhaustion. That's when I saw it. A manila envelope tucked under my windshield wiper, my name written across it in Dad's distinctive handwriting. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Grief-induced mirages of paternal attention that had never existed. But the envelope was real, substantial, and definitely in Dad's careful script. I looked around the empty parking lot, wondering who could have placed it there. The only person I could see was James Morrison, Dad's longtime attorney, getting into a Mercedes across the lot. He caught my eye and nodded solemnly before driving away. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages written in Dad's handwriting, and a key I didn't recognize. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, and I had to sit down on the curb because my legs couldn't support me anymore. The words that followed would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family, my father, and myself. Chapter 2, The Letter That Changed Everything. My dearest Sarah. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've just endured what I imagine was a very difficult day. I know Victoria well enough to predict how she behaved at my funeral, and I know you well enough to know how deeply her words wounded you. That's why I'm writing this letter, to tell you truths I should have shared years ago, but was too much of a coward to speak aloud. First, you need to know that every cruel thing Victoria said about you today was a lie. Every implication that you were a disappointment to me was the opposite of the truth. You, my darling daughter, have been the light of my life since the day you were born, and my greatest regret is that I never told you so. I know this seems impossible given how I treated you, given how I always seemed to favor Victoria, given how I spent your entire childhood pushing you to be more like her. But there's a reason for all of that, and it's time you knew the whole story. Victoria is not my biological daughter. I stopped reading, the words blurring through my tears. My hands shook so violently that the letter fluttered in the wind, and I had to grip it tighter to keep from losing it entirely. Your mother had an affair when Victoria was conceived. I found out when Victoria was 3 years old. A paternity test I demanded during a custody battle with your mother's first husband revealed the truth. Victoria's biological father is Marcus Blackstone, Jonathan's father, though neither Victoria nor Marcus knows this. I chose to raise Victoria as my own because I loved your mother, and because a 3-year-old child doesn't deserve to pay for adult mistakes. But I never loved Victoria the way I loved you. How could I? You were my flesh and blood, my actual daughter, the child who inherited my love of books and my tendency to overthink everything. But here's where I failed you so completely that I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I was so afraid that people would figure out Victoria wasn't mine that I overcompensated. I showered her with attention and praise and opportunities, trying to make everyone believe she was the daughter I was most proud of. I thought if I treated you with more restraint, more criticism, people would assume you were the biological child and Victoria was the stepdaughter I was trying too hard to love. It was the worst kind of reverse psychology, and it destroyed both of you in different ways. I turned Victoria into a spoiled, entitled woman who believes the world owes her everything, and I turned you into someone who doubts her own worth despite being the most remarkable person I've ever known. The letter fell from my numb fingers and scattered across the wet pavement. I scrambled to collect the pages, my mind reeling from revelations that upended every assumption I'd ever had about my family. Dad had loved me more. Dad had always loved me more. Victoria wasn't even his biological daughter. The favoritism I'd endured my entire life had been an elaborate performance designed to hide the truth, a performance that had cost me my self-esteem and him his relationship with his actual daughter. I continued reading with hands that shook so badly I could barely make out the words. Sarah, you need to know who you really are. Not the failure Victoria painted you as today, but the incredible woman you've become despite my neglect. Do you remember when you were 8 years old and you spent your entire summer teaching the neighbor's autistic son how to read? I watched you through the kitchen window every day, showing endless patience with a child everyone else had given up on. When he read his first complete sentence, you cried with joy. That's when I knew you had a gift, not for achievement or success in the traditional sense, but for seeing the worth in people others overlook. Do you remember when you were 15 and you used your birthday money to buy Christmas presents for the kids at the homeless shelter? You never told anyone, but I found the receipts in your room. While Victoria was demanding more expensive gifts, you were thinking about children who had nothing. Do you remember when you were 25 and you took a job at the worst school in the district because they were desperate for teachers? Everyone said you were crazy, that you'd never advance your career in a place like that. But I knew better. I knew you weren't there for your career, you were there for the kids who needed you most. Victoria has never done anything selfless in her entire life. Everything she's achieved has been handed to her, by me, by Jonathan, by a world that rewards beauty and charm over substance. But you? You've built something real. You've touched lives. You've made a difference in ways that can't be measured by bank accounts or social status. I have so many regrets, Sarah. I regret not telling you how proud I was every time you chose compassion over ambition. I regret not defending you when Victoria made her cruel comments. I regret not hugging you more, not telling you how much you meant to me, not showing you the love you deserved. But most of all, I regret the lie I've been living for 28 years. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank on Michigan Avenue. Box number 247. Inside, you'll find documents that prove everything I've told you, along with some other things that belong to you. You see, while everyone believes I left my entire estate to Victoria, that's not quite true. I did leave her the house and the business and most of my liquid assets, money she'll burn through within a decade because she's never learned the value of anything. But the real treasure, the legacy I actually cared about, goes to you. The safety deposit box contains the deed to the property where I'm building my final project, a school for underprivileged children in your name. The Sarah Mitchell Academy for Learning Differences. It's been under construction for 2 years, funded by assets Victoria doesn't know exist. It's set to open next fall, and it's going to serve exactly the kind of children you've spent your career helping. You're not just inheriting a school, Sarah. You're inheriting the chance to be the principal, to hire teachers who share your values, to create an environment where children who don't fit traditional molds can thrive. It's a $10 million facility, fully funded for the next 50 years, and it's yours. But more than that, it's my apology. It's my way of telling you that I always knew who you really were, even when I was too cowardly to show it. It's my investment in the future you're going to build, the lives you're going to change, the difference you're going to make. Victoria will probably contest this when she finds out. She'll claim I wasn't of sound mind, that you manipulated me somehow. But I've made sure everything is ironclad. The school is yours, and there's nothing she can do about it. There's one more thing in the safety deposit box, a folder containing documentation of every charitable thing you've ever done that you thought no one knew about. I've been keeping track, Sarah. Every act of kindness, every moment of grace, every time you chose to help instead of help yourself. I documented it all because I was so proud of the person you were becoming, and I wanted proof of your character when the time came to reveal the truth. I know this letter doesn't undo 28 years of damage. I know saying, "I'm sorry," can't give you back your childhood or restore your self-confidence. But I hope it can give you something else, the knowledge that you were never the failure, never the disappointment, never the lesser daughter. You were always my pride and joy. You were always the child I was most proud of. You were always enough. I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you. And I'm sorry it took my death for you to finally hear it. Your father, Robert Mitchell. P.S. There's a manila folder in the safety deposit box labeled, "For Victoria." Don't give it to her unless she forces your hand. But if she does, if she tries to destroy you one more time, that folder contains every piece of evidence about her true parentage, including DNA tests and documentation of her mother's affair. I pray you never have to use it, but I want you to have the truth on your side if she tries to take what's yours. I sat on the curb outside the cemetery for 2 hours, reading and rereading the letter until I had memorized every word. The rain had stopped, but I was still soaked through, still shivering, still trying to process revelations that had turned my entire world upside down. My father had loved me. He had always loved me. Everything I'd believed about myself, about my place in the family, about my worth as a daughter and as a person, all of it had been based on a lie he'd told to protect a secret that was never mine to bear. Victoria wasn't his daughter, but I was. I had always been the real heir, the true legacy, the child he was actually proud of. The favoritism that had tormented me for decades had been a performance, a misdirection, a sacrifice he'd made to hide the truth about her parentage. And now he'd given me something Victoria could never have, never take away, never diminish, a school in my name, a future built on my values, a legacy that honored who I really was instead of who I'd failed to become. The drive to the bank seemed surreal, like moving through a dream where the laws of physics had been suspended. Everything looked the same buildings, the same streets, the same gray Chicago sky, but everything had changed. I was no longer Sarah Mitchell, the disappointing daughter. I was Sarah Mitchell, the beloved child who had been carrying her father's hopes all along. First National Bank on Michigan Avenue was an imposing building with marble columns and brass fixtures that spoke of old money and established power. I walked through the massive lobby in my rain-soaked Target dress, still clutching the key Dad had left me, and approached the information desk. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I told the receptionist, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled hair and a professional smile. "Of course. Do you have your key and identification?" I handed over both, along with the letter from Dad that authorized my access. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly as she read the letter, probably recognizing Dad's name and realizing this was related to his recent death, but she quickly recovered her professional composure. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Miss Mitchell. Your father was a valued client for many years. If you'll follow me, I'll escort you to the vault." The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, roughly the size of a briefcase. When the bank employee left me alone in the small viewing room, I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was everything Dad had promised, and more. The deed to the Sarah Mitchell Academy for Learning Differences. The architectural plans showing a beautiful, modern facility designed specifically for children with special needs. The trust documents establishing a 50-year endowment. The contracts with teachers already hired for the fall opening. The business plan outlining a revolutionary approach to special education. But there was also a photo album I hadn't expected. Page after page of pictures I'd never known existed, me teaching the neighbor's autistic son, captured through our kitchen window. Me handing out Christmas presents at the homeless shelter, photographed from across the room by someone I'd never noticed. Me working late at the school where I taught, staying after hours to help struggling students, documented by someone who'd been watching and caring more than I'd ever known. Each photo had a date and a caption in Dad's handwriting. Sarah showing infinite patience with Tommy, age 8. Sarah sacrificing her birthday to help less fortunate children, age 15. Sarah choosing to work at Franklin Elementary despite better offers, age 25. It was a secret album of love, a hidden record of all the moments when my father had been watching and caring and feeling proud, even as he was pretending to be disappointed. At the bottom of the box was the manila folder labeled, "For Victoria." I opened it despite his warning, needing to understand the full scope of what I'd inherited. Inside were DNA test results proving that Victoria was Marcus Blackstone's daughter, not Dad's. Medical records from Mom's gynecologist documenting the timeline of her affair. Private investigator reports detailing the relationship between Mom and Marcus. Legal documents showing that Marcus had never known about Victoria's existence, and that Jonathan was therefore unknowingly married to his half-sister. The revelation was staggering. Not only was Victoria not Dad's daughter, but she had unknowingly married her own half-brother. The Blackstone fortune she'd married into was her birthright, blood money she'd never known belonged to her. I closed the folder quickly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of secrets Dad had carried. No wonder he'd felt compelled to overcompensate with Victoria. No wonder he'd been afraid to show his true feelings. The web of lies and hidden truths was so complex that one revelation could have destroyed multiple families. But he'd protected everyone, at the cost of his relationship with me. As I drove home to my studio apartment, my mind raced with possibilities. I could open the school and never tell Victoria about any of this. I could start my new life as an educator and administrator, building something meaningful while letting Dad's secrets die with him. Or I could wait. I could wait for Victoria to make her next move, to launch her next attack, to remind me once again how little I mattered to our family. And then I could show her exactly how wrong she'd been about everything. The choice, for the first time in my life, was entirely mine. But I had a feeling I wouldn't have to wait long. Chapter 3, The School and the Scandal. 3 months after Dad's funeral, I was standing in the partially completed lobby of the Sarah Mitchell Academy for Learning Differences, watching contractors install custom-designed furniture that would accommodate children with various physical and cognitive needs. The school was everything Dad's letter had promised and more, a state-of-the-art facility designed from the ground up to serve students who didn't fit into traditional educational models. The building itself was beautiful in its functionality. Wide hallways with soft lighting to accommodate children with sensory processing disorders. Classrooms with adjustable acoustics for students with hearing differences. A sensory garden where children could go to decompress when overwhelmed. Art therapy rooms with specialized equipment. A gymnasium designed for adaptive physical education. And at the center of it all, a library that took my breath away every time I entered it, floor-to-ceiling windows, reading nooks in every corner, and thousands of books representing every reading level and learning style imaginable. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the woman Dad had already hired to be the assistant principal, stood beside me reviewing the staffing plans for our fall opening. She was a woman in her early 50s with graying hair and the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of working with challenging children. "Your father was very specific about the type of educators he wanted here," she said, adjusting her reading glasses as she looked over the personnel files. "Every teacher we've hired has experience with learning differences, and most of them have personal connections to the mission. Sarah Martinez in our autism support classroom has a son on the spectrum. David Kim in our dyslexia program struggled with reading himself as a child. Maria Santos in our emotional support classroom was a foster child who aged out of the system. It was exactly what I would have chosen if I'd been designing the school myself." Dad had somehow known, despite never having had a real conversation with me about my educational philosophy, exactly what kind of environment I dreamed of creating. "We're expecting 42 students for our first year," Dr. Walsh continued. "All of them children who've struggled in traditional settings. Some have been homeschooled for years because their parents couldn't find appropriate programs. Others have been bounced from school to school, accumulating failures and trauma along the way." I nodded, thinking about my own students at Franklin Elementary, the ones who'd been labeled behavioral problems, or slow learners, when what they really needed was understanding and specialized support. "What about the board of directors?" I asked. Dad's letter had mentioned a governing structure, but I hadn't yet been briefed on the details. Dr. Walsh smiled. "Your father was very clear about that too. He wanted the board to be composed of people who understand the mission from personal experience. We have Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a child psychologist who specializes in learning differences. Mark Rodriguez, a successful entrepreneur who didn't learn to read until he was 12 due to severe dyslexia. Patricia Williams, a former special education teacher whose grandson has autism. And James Morrison, your father's attorney, who serves as the legal advisor." The name caught my attention. James Morrison was the man I'd seen at the cemetery, the one who'd presumably placed Dad's letter on my car. "Has Mr. Morrison mentioned anything about my family? About my sister?" Dr. Walsh's expression grew cautious. "He did say that your father anticipated there might be some family complications regarding the school. He assured me that legally, everything is solid. The academy is yours, Ms. Mitchell, regardless of what anyone else might claim." Before I could ask for more details, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the message made my blood run cold. "Sarah, this is Jonathan Blackstone. Victoria and I need to speak with you immediately about Dad's estate. We're coming to your apartment at 7 p.m. tonight. This concerns some irregularities we've discovered in the will." I showed the message to Dr. Walsh, whose face darkened with concern. "Irregularities," she said. "There are no irregularities. Your father spent 2 years setting this up, working with the best lawyers in Chicago to ensure everything was legally bulletproof." "I know," I said, but my hands were already shaking. Victoria must have found out about the school. The question was, how much had she found out? Did she know about the academy, or did she also know about her own parentage? I left the school and drove back to my apartment with a sense of impending doom. For 3 months, I'd been living in a peaceful bubble, learning about the school, working with the staff, and slowly beginning to understand that my father had loved me after all. But I'd always known Victoria would eventually discover the truth, and when she did, she'd come for me with everything she had. My studio apartment above the pizza shop had never felt smaller than it did while I waited for 7 p.m. to arrive. I'd been planning to move once the school opened, to find a place more befitting my new role as principal of a prestigious academy. But tonight, sitting on my second-hand couch in my 400-square-foot space, I felt like the old Sarah again, small, insignificant, and about to be crushed by my sister's superior force of will. They arrived precisely at 7, and the sound of Victoria's heels on the metal stairs leading to my apartment was like a countdown to execution. When I opened the door, I was struck immediately by how different she looked. Gone was the composed grief of the funeral. In its place was a fury so intense it seemed to crackle in the air around her. Jonathan stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but determined. He was a tall man in his late 30s, with the kind of bland handsomeness that came from good genetics and expensive grooming. Normally, he was pleasant enough in his interactions with me, polite but distant, treating me like a harmless eccentric relative who needed to be tolerated at family gatherings. Tonight, however, his blue eyes were cold with calculation. "Sarah," Victoria said, pushing past me into the apartment without invitation. "We need to talk." She surveyed my small space with barely concealed disgust, taking in the fold-out couch, the tiny kitchenette, the single window that looked out onto the alley behind the pizza shop. Her designer outfit, a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my rent, looked completely out of place in my modest surroundings. "Nice place," she said with trademark sarcasm. "Very authentic." Jonathan remained standing while Victoria settled herself on my couch as if she owned it. The power dynamic was immediately clear. She was here to dominate, and I was expected to submit. "I suppose you think you're very clever," she began without preamble. "Convincing a dying old man to alter his will in your favor." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, though of course I knew exactly what she meant. "Don't insult my intelligence, Sarah. We know about the school." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel my pulse racing, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What school?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and humorless. "The Sarah Mitchell Academy for Learning Differences." "Really, Sarah? You couldn't even come up with a less obvious name?" Jonathan spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We've been conducting a thorough audit of Robert's assets, and we discovered several financial irregularities. Specifically, the transfer of significant funds to a trust that was never mentioned in the formal will reading. It took us 3 months to trace all the paperwork," Victoria added, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "But we found it. $10 million, diverted from the estate to fund some little vanity project for Daddy's favorite charity case." The cruelty of the phrase hit exactly as intended. Favorite charity case. Not daughter. Not family member. Charity case. "The will was very specific," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Dad had the right to dispose of his assets as he saw fit." "Dispose of his assets, yes," Jonathan agreed. "But not to hide them from legitimate heirs during the probate process. What you've done, what he did, constitutes fraud. We could have this entire arrangement overturned in court." Victoria leaned forward, her predatory smile returning. "But we're not unreasonable people, Sarah. We're family. So we're prepared to make you an offer." Here it comes, I thought. The moment where they try to buy me off, to make me disappear quietly so they can take what Dad meant for me to have. "We'll allow you to keep the building," Victoria said, as if she were offering me a tremendous gift. "You can even keep the name, if it means that much to you. But the endowment, the $10 million, that needs to be returned to the estate where it belongs. You could run your little school," Jonathan added, "but you'd need to find your own funding. Apply for grants, hold fundraisers, charge tuition. You know, like a real business." The offer was designed to sound reasonable while being completely impossible. A school for learning differences couldn't charge the kind of tuition that would sustain operations, and grant funding was limited and unreliable. Without the endowment, the academy would fail within a year. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Victoria's smile became genuinely threatening. "Then we take this to court, and you lose everything." We have the resources to fight this for years, Sarah. Do you? It was a rhetorical question. They knew I couldn't afford a legal battle against the Blackstone fortune. They were offering me the illusion of victory while ensuring my actual defeat. I need time to think about it, I said. You have 24 hours, Jonathan said, standing. After that, we file suit to have the trust dissolved and the funds returned to the estate. They moved toward the door, but Victoria paused for one final cruelty. You know, Sarah, I almost feel sorry for you. All these years, you actually believed Daddy loved you more than me. But if he had, don't you think he would have told you about this wonderful gift while he was alive? Don't you think he would have shared his plans with his beloved daughter instead of hiding them away like some guilty secret? The words found their mark, awakening every insecurity I'd been fighting since reading Dad's letter. Why hadn't he told me? Why had he waited until after his death to reveal his love? Why had he let me spend 28 years believing I was the disappointment? The truth is, Victoria continued, he felt guilty about how you turned out. The school was his way of trying to buy forgiveness for having a failure as a daughter. It was pity, Sarah. Not love. Pity. After they left, I sat in my apartment for hours, staring at the folder labeled, "For Victoria," that I'd brought home from the bank. Dad had given me the truth, not just about the school, but about her parentage, her marriage, her entire life built on lies. He'd given me the power to destroy her completely. But he'd also hoped I'd never have to use it. 24 hours, they'd said. 24 hours to decide whether to surrender the school that represented everything Dad had actually wanted for me, or to detonate a truth bomb that would obliterate multiple lives. I thought about the children who were counting on the academy to open in the fall. 42 kids who'd been failed by every other institution, who needed what we were building. Teachers who'd already been hired, who'd turned down other opportunities to be part of our mission. Dr. Walsh, who'd dedicated her career to serving children like these. I thought about Dad's letter, about his regret and his love and his hope that I would use his gift to change lives. And I thought about Victoria's cruel smile, her casual dismissal of everything I'd ever accomplished, her willingness to destroy a school full of vulnerable children just to prove she could. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I picked up my phone and texted Jonathan back, "I'll give you my answer tomorrow at 6 p.m. Let's meet at Victoria's house. I have some things to show both of you." Then I called James Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, this is Sarah Mitchell. I need to ask you a question about my father's instructions regarding the school." "Of course, Sarah. How can I help?" "Did my father ever give you specific guidance about what to do if Victoria tried to contest the trust?" There was a pause before he answered, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully measured. "Your father was very thorough in his planning, Sarah. He anticipated several potential scenarios and provided me with detailed instructions for each one. Including this one? Especially this one. He said that if Victoria ever tried to take the school away from you, I should remind you that he left you more than just property and money. He left you the truth. And he trusted you to know when and how to use it." I hung up the phone and opened the manila folder. Inside was everything Dad had promised, and a handwritten note I hadn't noticed before, clipped to the front of the DNA results. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means Victoria has forced your hand. I'm sorry she's made this choice, but I'm not sorry you have the power to stop her. The truth isn't meant to be a weapon, but sometimes it's the only shield we have. Use it wisely, but use it. The children who need your school deserve better than Victoria's greed. Love, Dad." The next evening, I drove to Victoria's mansion in Lake Forest with a briefcase containing copies of every document from the safety deposit box. The house was exactly what you'd expect from someone with her taste and Jonathan's money, a sprawling Tudor revival with manicured gardens and a circular driveway that could accommodate half a dozen luxury cars. Victoria answered the door herself, which surprised me. Usually, they had staff for such things. "Sarah," she said with false brightness. "Right on time. I do hope you've come to your senses about this whole school nonsense." I followed her through rooms that looked like they'd been decorated by someone with unlimited funds and no personal taste. Everything was expensive and beautiful and completely devoid of personality, a perfect reflection of Victoria's approach to life. Jonathan was waiting in what he probably called his study, a room lined with leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been opened, dominated by a massive desk that served as a prop for his own self-importance. "Sarah," he said, not bothering to stand. "I trust you've had time to consider our offer." "I have," I said, setting my briefcase on his desk. "But before I give you my answer, I have some information I think you both should see." Victoria settled into a chair with the satisfaction of someone who believed she'd already won. "If this is some sob story about the poor disabled children, Sarah, save it. We're not heartless. We're just realistic about how estate law works." "Actually," I said, opening my briefcase, "this is about family." I pulled out the first document, a copy of Victoria's birth certificate, with Dad's name listed as the father. "This is what the world believes about you, Victoria. That you're Robert Mitchell's daughter, born to Robert and Margaret Mitchell on April 3, 1988. Victoria glanced at the certificate with bored indifference. "Obviously. What's your point?" I pulled out the second document, the DNA test results. "This is the truth. You are not Robert Mitchell's biological daughter. Your real father is Marcus Blackstone." The reaction was immediate and electric. Victoria's face went white, then red, then white again. Jonathan stood so quickly his chair fell over backward. "That's impossible," Victoria said, but her voice was shaky. "That's a lie. You forged this somehow." "I didn't forge anything," I said calmly. "This test was conducted in 1991, when you were 3 years old. Dad kept the results for 32 years. I pulled out more documents, the medical records, the private investigator reports, the timeline of Mom's affair. Each piece of evidence hit like a physical blow, and I watched Victoria's entire sense of identity crumble in real time. "Marcus Blackstone is your biological father," I continued. "Which means, Jonathan, that you married your half-sister." Jonathan made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. He grabbed the papers from my hands, reading frantically, his face growing paler with each page. "This can't be real," he whispered. "This can't be true." "It's all true," I said. "Every word. Your father had an affair with my mother. Victoria is the product of that affair. Dad raised her as his own to protect everyone involved, but she was never his biological daughter." Victoria was hyperventilating now, clutching the arms of her chair like she might fall off the world. But if Marcus is my father, then the Blackstone money, the inheritance, belongs to you by blood," I confirmed. "You've been living on your own family fortune your entire adult life, never knowing it was yours by right." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared at me with something approaching horror, while Jonathan looked like he might vomit. "Why are you telling us this?" Victoria finally managed to ask. "Because you forced me to," I said simply. "You threatened to take away the school Dad built for children who need it. You called it a vanity project, a charity case, a guilty gesture. But it wasn't any of those things. It was love. Real love, from a father to his daughter. His biological daughter. Me." I stood up, closing my briefcase with a decisive snap. "So here's my counteroffer. You're going to drop any legal challenge to the school's endowment. You're going to publicly support the Academy and its mission. And in return, I'm going to keep this information confidential. You're blackmailing us, Jonathan said, his voice hoarse with shock. I'm protecting what's mine, I corrected. The same way Dad protected what was yours for 35 years. Victoria found her voice again, though it was shaky and uncertain. And if we refuse? I pulled one final document from my briefcase, a letter I'd written to the Chicago Tribune. Then tomorrow morning, this story goes to every major newspaper in Chicago. Blackstone heir unknowingly marries half-sister will be front-page news. The scandal will destroy both of your reputations, probably end Jonathan's business career, and turn you into a laughingstock among the social circles you care so much about. The threat was nuclear, and we all knew it. In an age of social media and viral news cycles, a story like this would follow them forever. But more than that, I continued, it would destroy your children. Emma and Michael don't deserve to pay for adult mistakes and family secrets. They don't deserve to grow up knowing their parents are half-siblings, or to face the questions and cruelty that would follow them for the rest of their lives. That was the killing blow. Victoria might have been willing to risk her own reputation, but the mention of her children broke her completely. What do you want? She whispered. I want you to leave me alone. I want you to let me run the school Dad built for me. I want you to stop questioning my worth and my accomplishments and my place in the family. And I want you to remember that the next time you call someone a charity case or a disappointment or a failure, you might be talking to the only person in the room who's actually accomplished something meaningful. I packed up my briefcase and headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Victoria? You might want to have a conversation with your actual father about your inheritance rights. The Blackstone fortune is considerably larger than what Dad left you. Turns out you've been settling for crumbs when you could have had the whole cake. I left them sitting in that sterile study, surrounded by unread books and shattered illusions, and drove back to my small apartment with a sense of completion I'd never felt before. The school would open as planned. The children would get the education they deserved. And for the first time in my life, I would never again have to wonder whether I was good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to deserve love. I was Robert Mitchell's daughter, and that had always been enough. Chapter 4, The Academy Opens and Truth Prevails. 6 months later, on a crisp September morning, I stood in the lobby of the Sarah Mitchell Academy for Learning Differences watching 42 children and their families arrive for our first day of school. The building hummed with nervous energy and excitement as students who'd struggled in traditional settings stepped into an environment designed specifically for their needs. 8-year-old Marcus Rodriguez, who'd been expelled from 3 schools for behavioral issues related to his ADHD, walked through the doors holding his mother's hand and staring in wonder at our sensory-friendly lighting and calm color palette. His mother, tears in her eyes, whispered to me, he hasn't been excited about school in 2 years. 12-year-old Emma Chen, who'd been homeschooled since 2nd grade because her severe dyslexia made traditional classrooms impossible, navigated our wide hallways with confidence, already planning which reading nook in the library would become her favorite spot. 15-year-old David Thompson, who'd been labeled behavior problem and shuffled between alternative programs for years, stood straighter than I'd ever seen him as he realized that none of our teachers were looking at him with suspicion or fear. These were my students now. Not the perfect, easy children Victoria's world valued, but the complicated, brilliant, struggling, remarkable kids who needed someone to see their potential instead of their problems. Dr. Walsh found me during the lunch hour, both of us exhausted but exhilarated by the morning's success. How do you think it's going? She asked, settling into one of the ergonomic chairs in my office, an office that still felt surreal to occupy. Better than I dared hope, I admitted. The Rodriguez boy actually raised his hand in math class. Emma Chen read aloud during our morning circle. David Thompson helped 2 younger students find their way to art therapy. Your father would be proud, Dr. Walsh said softly. I looked out my office window at the courtyard where several students were eating lunch in our outdoor classroom, a space designed for children who learned better in natural settings. I think he is proud. Finally. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it expecting to see something from one of our teachers. Instead, it was from Victoria. "Sarah, I saw the article about the school in the Tribune. Congratulations. It looks beautiful." The message was simple, but it represented something that would have been impossible 6 months ago: acknowledgement. Respect. Maybe even the beginning of something that could eventually become a real relationship between sisters. The Chicago Tribune article had run the previous Sunday, a full-page feature about innovative special education in the Chicago area. The headline read, "Sarah Mitchell Academy, a revolutionary approach to learning differences." The article featured photos of our beautiful facility, interviews with our specialized teachers, and profiles of several families whose children had found hope in our program. But what had surprised me most was a quote near the end of the article from Victoria herself. "My sister Sarah has always had a gift for seeing potential where others see problems. The Sarah Mitchell Academy represents everything our family values about education, compassion, and giving every child the chance to succeed. We're incredibly proud of what she's accomplished." It wasn't a complete transformation of our relationship. That would take years, if it happened at all. But it was an acknowledgement that I existed, that I mattered, that I had value beyond being her disappointing little sister. The changes in Victoria's life had been swift and dramatic once she'd learned the truth about her parentage. Within 2 weeks of our confrontation, she'd hired a private investigator to verify everything I'd shown her. When the results came back confirming Dad's documentation, she'd flown to California to meet with Marcus Blackstone. According to mutual acquaintances, the meeting had been awkward but ultimately productive. Marcus, now in his 70s and recently widowed, had been shocked to learn he had a daughter he'd never known existed. But he'd also been pleased to discover that his biological child had grown into a successful, accomplished woman. The legal implications were complex. Victoria was already wealthy through her marriage to Jonathan, and she'd inherited a substantial amount from Dad's estate. But she was also entitled to a portion of the Blackstone fortune as Marcus's biological daughter. More importantly, she'd gained something she'd never had, a complete understanding of her own identity. Her marriage to Jonathan had survived the revelation, though it required extensive counseling and some creative legal maneuvering to address the technical consanguinity issue. They decided to stay together for the sake of their children and their genuine affection for each other, but they'd also been quietly planning to relocate to Europe, where the scandal would be less likely to follow them. As for me, the past 6 months had been a whirlwind of transformation that went far beyond just opening the school. I'd moved out of my studio apartment and into a beautiful townhouse near the academy, close enough to walk to work but far enough from the city center to have a garden where I could grow vegetables and flowers. It was the first time in my adult life that I'd lived somewhere that felt like home rather than just a place to sleep. I'd also begun dating Dr. Michael Patterson, a child psychologist who consulted with our school and shared my passion for helping children with learning differences. He was kind, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by social status or family wealth, exactly the kind of man I'd always hoped to meet but never thought I deserved. Most importantly, I'd found my professional calling in a way that went beyond just having a job. As principal of the academy, I wasn't just teaching individual students, I was creating an entire environment where children who'd been failed by traditional systems could thrive. Every policy I wrote, every teacher I hired, every program I developed was designed to serve kids who'd been told they were problems rather than children with potential. But the real transformation was internal. I no longer woke up each morning wondering if I was good enough. I no longer second-guessed every decision or apologized for taking up space. I no longer carried the weight of believing I was the family disappointment. Dad's letter had given me more than just a school and financial security. It had given me the truth about who I'd always been, and that truth had set me free from decades of self-doubt. 3 weeks after the Tribune article was published, I received an unexpected visitor at the school. I was in my office reviewing applications from families who wanted to enroll their children for the next academic year when Dr. Walsh knocked on my door. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your grandmother." I looked up, confused. Both of my grandmothers had died years ago. My grandmother? Margaret's mother. Your maternal grandmother. She says her name is Dorothy Pearson. My mother had rarely talked about her family, and I'd assumed most of her relatives had either died or lost touch years ago. I told Dr. Walsh to send her in, curious about what could bring a long-lost relative to visit after all these years. Dorothy Pearson was a woman in her early 80s, small and elegantly dressed, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She walked with a cane but moved with purpose, and when she entered my office, she looked around with obvious approval. "So this is what Robert built for you," she said without preamble. "It's even more impressive than the newspaper made it sound." "Mrs. Pearson," I said, standing to greet her. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've ever met." "We haven't," she agreed, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Your mother made sure of that. But I've been keeping track of you for years, and I decided it was time we had a conversation." "Keeping track of me?" She smiled, and I could see something of my mother in her expression. "Sarah, do you really think your father was the only one who knew about Margaret's affair? I'm the one who told him to get that paternity test when Victoria was 3. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "You knew? All this time, you knew Victoria wasn't his daughter?" "Of course I knew. I also knew that Robert was covering for Marcus and your mother, and that he was sacrificing his relationship with you to protect Victoria from the truth. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was convinced it was the right thing to do." Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, which she placed on my desk. What I didn't know until recently was that he documented everything so thoroughly. When I read about Victoria's attempts to contest the school's endowment, I realized it was time to make sure you had all the facts. I opened the envelope to find more letters, dozens of them, all in Dad's handwriting, all addressed to Dorothy Pearson. "Your father wrote to me every month for 28 years, she explained. Every letter was about you. Your achievements, your kindness, your struggles, your disappointments. He documented every moment of pride and every regret about not being able to show his love openly." I picked up one letter at random, dated from when I was 16. "Dorothy, Sarah made honor roll again this semester, but when I tried to celebrate with her, she just looked confused and asked if I was feeling all right. I've been so committed to this charade with Victoria that my own daughter doesn't believe I could be proud of her. What have I done to this beautiful girl who deserves so much better than the father I've been able to be?" Another letter, from when I was 25. "Dorothy, Sarah took a job at the worst school in the district today. Everyone thinks she's sabotaging her career, but I know better. She's going where she's needed most, just like she always does. I wanted to tell her how proud I was, but how can I explain that kind of pride when I've spent years pretending to be disappointed in her? She's become the woman I always hoped she'd be, despite my failures as her father." I read letter after letter, each one a testament to a love I'd never known existed. Dad had been watching, caring, celebrating, and suffering right along with me for my entire life. He'd just been forced to do it in secret. Why didn't he tell me? I asked Dorothy, tears streaming down my face. Why did he let me think he was disappointed in me? Because he made a promise to your mother before she died, Dorothy explained. She was terrified that the truth about Victoria's parentage would destroy too many lives. She made Robert swear that he'd protect Victoria from ever learning she wasn't his daughter, and that he'd protect Marcus from having to acknowledge an affair that could have ruined his marriage. But what about protecting me? That's what the school was for. That's what the trust was for. That's what all of this was for. Dorothy gestured around my office. He couldn't give you the childhood you deserved, but he could give you the future you'd earned. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Sarah, you should know that your father wasn't the only one who was proud of you. I've been proud too, all these years. Proud and angry that you didn't know how wonderful you were. After she left, I sat in my office reading Dad's letters until well after dark. Each one was a piece of the relationship we'd never been able to have, a conversation we'd never been able to share, a love that had been forced underground but had never diminished. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery where Dad was buried. I hadn't been back since the funeral, but I felt ready now to have the conversation we'd never managed while he was alive. His grave was well maintained, with fresh flowers that someone, probably Victoria, had left recently. I sat cross-legged on the grass beside the headstone and pulled out one of his letters. Dear Dad, I said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish. I got your letters. All of them. And I understand now why you did what you did. A gentle breeze rustled the trees overhead, and for a moment, I could almost imagine he was listening. I want you to know that the school is everything you hoped it would be. We have 42 students this year, and every one of them is thriving in ways their previous schools said was impossible. Marcus Rodriguez is reading above grade level for the first time in his life. Emma Chen is writing poetry that would make you cry. David Thompson is going to graduate on time and has already been accepted to 3 colleges. I paused, watching a cardinal land on Dad's headstone. But more than that, I want you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all those years. You were showing me that love isn't always about recognition or praise or public acknowledgement. Sometimes love is about sacrifice. Sometimes it's about making the hard choice to protect people, even when that protection costs you the relationship you want most. The cardinal cocked its head, as if listening to my words. I forgive you, Dad. For the childhood I didn't have, for the confidence you couldn't give me, for the years I spent wondering if I was good enough. I understand now that you were caught between impossible choices, and you tried to minimize the damage to everyone involved. I stood up, brushing grass off my jeans. But mostly, I want to thank you. Thank you for seeing who I really was, even when I couldn't see it myself. Thank you for believing in my future when I couldn't imagine one. Thank you for giving me the tools to help children the way I wish someone had helped me. And thank you for loving me enough to sacrifice our relationship to protect our family. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of not knowing, of wondering, of doubting myself had finally lifted. I was Robert Mitchell's daughter, and I was exactly who he'd hoped I would become. 6 months later, the Sarah Mitchell Academy was featured in a national documentary about innovative approaches to special education. The film crew spent a week at our school, capturing the daily miracles that happened when children were given the support they needed to succeed. The documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was later broadcast on PBS stations across the country. It won 3 Emmy Awards, including one for Outstanding Achievement in Educational Programming. But the moment that meant the most to me came during the filming, when they interviewed some of our students about their experiences at the academy. 15-year-old David Thompson, the boy who'd been labeled a behavior problem and shuffled between alternative programs, looked directly into the camera and said, "Ms. Mitchell saved my life. She saw something in me that nobody else ever saw, and she made me believe it was real." 12-year-old Emma Chen, the girl with severe dyslexia who'd been homeschooled for years, held up a book she'd written and illustrated herself. "This school taught me that being different isn't the same as being broken. I'm not broken. I'm just Emma." And 8-year-old Marcus Rodriguez, the boy with ADHD who'd been expelled from 3 schools, grinned at the camera and said, "I used to think I was stupid. Now I know I'm just a different kind of smart." Those were the words that would have made Dad proudest. Not the awards or the recognition or the national attention, but the simple truth that we were helping children see their own worth. The night after the documentary aired, I received a call from Victoria. We'd been exchanging occasional texts and emails over the past year, slowly rebuilding some kind of relationship, but this was the first time she'd actually called since our confrontation. "Sarah," she said, and her voice was different somehow, warmer, more genuine than I was used to hearing. "I watched the documentary tonight." "Thank you," I said. "What did you think?" "I think Dad would be incredibly proud of what you've built. But more than that, I think I finally understand why he loved you the way he did." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from Victoria, and it was enough. "I also wanted to tell you something," she continued. "Jonathan and I have decided to establish a scholarship fund at the academy. We want to ensure that families who can't afford private tuition can still access the kind of education you're providing." I was speechless. A year ago, Victoria had been trying to destroy the school. Now she was funding scholarships for students who needed it most. "Victoria, that's incredible." "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said quietly. "Thank Dad. He taught us both something about love, even if it took us 30 years to figure out what it was." After we hung up, I walked out to my garden and sat among the tomatoes and sunflowers I'd planted in the spring. The documentary had called me an innovative educator and a champion for children with learning differences. But the title that meant the most to me was the simplest one, daughter. I was Robert Mitchell's daughter, and that legacy was written not in wills or trust funds or safety deposit boxes, but in the lives of 42 children who now believed in themselves because someone had believed in them first. Dad's love had been complicated and painful and hidden for far too long. But it had also been real, and it had been enough to change everything. The Sarah Mitchell Academy would serve thousands of children over the coming decades. Victoria and Jonathan's scholarship fund would ensure that financial need never prevented a child from accessing our programs. Our model would be replicated in cities across the country, helping countless families who'd been failed by traditional educational systems. But all of that success, all of that impact, all of that legacy started with a letter written by a dying man who loved his daughter too much to let her go through life believing she wasn't enough. I was enough. I had always been enough. And now, finally, I knew it. As the sun set over my garden, I whispered a prayer of gratitude to the Father who'd given me everything I needed to become the woman I was meant to be, even when it cost him the relationship he wanted most. Love, I'd learned, wasn't always about recognition or praise or public acknowledgement. Sometimes love was about sacrifice. Sometimes it was about making the hard choice to protect people, even when that protection cost you everything. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love was about finding out that someone had been believing in you all along, waiting for the right moment to give you wings. Dad had given me wings. And I was finally ready to fly. 5 years later, I stood before the Chicago Board of Education presenting our revolutionary teaching methods. The Sarah Mitchell Academy had become a model for special education reform, with school districts implementing our approaches nationwide. "We don't try to fix children who are different," I explained. "We create environments where differences become strengths." In the audience sat Dr. Michael Patterson, my fiancé, Dr. Walsh, and Victoria and Jonathan, listening as I described the work that had become my life's passion. After my presentation, Victoria approached with genuine humility. "Sarah, I finally understand what real inheritance looks like," she said. "You inherited Dad's heart and used it to change the world, one child at a time." Jonathan extended his hand respectfully. "We want to expand the scholarship fund to create satellite academies in underserved communities. Would you help us design a program that could serve thousands of children?" The MacArthur Foundation called the next week. I'd been selected as a MacArthur Fellow for my innovative work in special education, the Genius Grant recognizing exceptional creativity and potential. Mrs. Henderson, now 92, called to congratulate me. They called you a genius, but I could have told them that 40 years ago. Your father always knew what you were destined to become. At Dad's grave, I sat among the fresh flowers Victoria brought weekly. Your letter didn't just save me, I told him. It saved thousands of children who will benefit from the love you couldn't show me directly. Every child who learns to read in our programs, every teenager who graduates when other schools said they'd never make it, they're all part of your legacy. A red cardinal landed on his headstone, the same species that had comforted me 5 years earlier. I finally understand what you were trying to teach me about love and sacrifice. You gave me the truth about myself, and that gift has multiplied beyond anything you could have imagined. The MacArthur ceremony took place on a crisp November evening. As I accepted the award, I saw Victoria crying with pride, Mrs. Henderson beaming, and my original 42 students, now teenagers and young adults, in the front row. My father once wrote that love isn't always about recognition or praise, I said during my speech. Sometimes it's about discovering that someone believed in you all along, waiting for the right moment to give you exactly what you needed to become who you were meant to be. The Sarah Mitchell Academy had become proof that the most powerful inheritance isn't money or property, it's the knowledge that you were loved, believed in, and valued for exactly who you are. I was Robert Mitchell's daughter, and I had finally learned to fly. Years later, when people asked about my journey from overlooked daughter to national advocate, I would tell them about a letter that changed everything. About a father's hidden love that transcended death itself. But mostly, I would tell them this: you are never too broken to be fixed, never too lost to be found, never too forgotten to be remembered. Someone, somewhere, believes in your potential even when you can't see it yourself. That belief can change the world.